Right, hi everyone, I'm Colin from Clear Channel. I've got Rob with me from Arla. I'm going to kick things off and start by answering this debate question we've been given today, which is, in a world of first-party data and precision targeting, can out-of-home still thrive? Now, unsurprisingly, I'm going to say, yes, it can. But I'm going to go one step further. I'm going to say that out-of-home is the best placed channel right now to thrive in the era of retail media. And that might sound like quite a punchy statement for me to make, but hopefully I'll be able to explain why, and then we'll hear from Rob from his views from Arla as well. So I'm going to start with this statement that we often talk about in out-of-home, that out-of-home is the oldest medium, but also the one with the brightest future. Of course, it's a channel that's been around for absolute decades, but it's one that's been through a huge digital transformation, which means it's a channel that continues to evolve and it continues to grow. In fact, the UK out-of-home market in 2023 grew double digits, which is massively in contrast to what's going on with all other traditional channels. But actually, the biggest story for me was what was going on in the FMCG category. Now, for context, the FMCG category is our biggest at Clear Channel from an advertiser revenue perspective. It represents about 25% of our business. So to see such significant growth of 30% in a year means there's something interesting going on, right? So there's obviously a few contributing factors. So we got things like TV fragmentation, HFSS restrictions, meaning that more brands are kind of shifting their budgets into out-of-home as their lead reach-driving channel. We've also got things like this kind of general increase in marketing investment, where we've seen brands kind of double down on building their brands, kind of using out-of-home to kind of battle the cost of living crisis, the threat of private label, and things like inflation, etc. And one of the biggest reasons why brands turn to out-of-home is for its main superpower, which is reach. Out-of-home reaches more of the UK population than any other media channel. In fact, it reaches 95% of UK adults on a daily basis. Now, we all know reach is important. It's obviously a term that gets talked about all the time. But I think sometimes we forget the reason why reach is so important, and that is to reach like category buyers. So as Byron Sharp says, it's not possible to grow market share without reaching category buyers who never or seldom buy your brands. Now, of course, things like precision targeting, performance media play a role in the omni-channel mix, but it's so important to have channels that are feeding the demand at the top of the funnel and reaching these like category buyers if we truly want to grow. So if we start to look at channels through the lens of their ability to reach like category buyers, we can see that out-of-home is still hugely strong in this space. So we take light cereal buyers, for example, we can see out-of-home reaches 95% of that audience. We could change that and look at light confectionery buyers. We'll see a similar story. And we can flip that again to light perfume buyers, and the story remains the same. And I could go on, which I'm not going to do, and you would see a similar story. What's really changed the game in the out-of-home market is the kind of rise of digital out-of-home. Now, digital out-of-home revenues grew 22% in the first half of this year in the UK. But actually, the bigger story here for me is actually the growth of reach. Digital out-of-home can now be considered a reach-driving channel in its own right. It reaches 84% of UK adults on a weekly basis, so it's kind of up there with similar levels as the TV market. And it means that we're obviously seeing digital out-of-home in all four corners of the UK through a number of different formats, reaching people at different touch points along the consumer journey. So high-impact formats at roadside environments and at high streets, through to shopping environments and retail environments at supermarkets and malls and so on. And what that means is that you're now combining out-of-home's main superpower, which is reach, with these kind of capabilities of digital out-of-home. So three main capabilities that I want to touch on is this kind of location, so this natural real-world proximity to retail hotspots across the UK. Data, so it's now powered by first and third-party data to optimize it from both a planning and a creative point of view. And then there's true flexibility means that you can now deliver messages in the right moments and the right time. And actually it means it's now talking a very similar language to retail media. So if you combine all those four elements together, you kind of have this perfect blend of both reach and retail, which means it's now playing a more increased role across the funnel. So of course, out-of-home's always been strong in the awareness phase through the reach, which I've obviously talked about, but it's now playing a much greater role in the consideration phase through those points I mentioned around kind of reaching the right audience in the right time, in the right location. And that's backed up by some research we actually did using mesh data, which you now know a lot about from this morning, which proves that out-of-home is the most likely channel to increase brand consideration versus the likes of TV and online. So I'm going to talk about some of these points in a little bit more detail. I'm going to do this through the lens of Ad Share Live. So Ad Share Live is Clear Channel's flagship product. It's the UK's largest digital out-of-home network. We just hit quite a significant milestone of 3,500 screens in the ground, and we can now deliver 66% of reach of the UK population from this network alone. So that's over 3/4 of the entire reach of digital out-of-home, as we've mentioned before. From a location perspective, so a couple of examples to bring this point to life is that Ad Share Live is in walking distance to well over 3,500 of the big branded grocery stores. So we're talking the likes of the big four supermarkets, we're talking the likes of the big convenience stores like Co-op, Tesco Metro, etc. If we look at that from a health and beauty angle, and we see, the biggest retailer in this space, Boots, we can see that Ad Share Live is in walking distance to well over 1,000 unique boot stores nationally. So you can see why it's kind of become the go-to digital out-of-home network for kind of FMCG and CPG brands, but also why retail media networks are starting to add this as part of their kind of off-site channel, because it makes sense from a location point of view. Once we start to add data in, this is where it becomes a lot more sophisticated. So we have an audience tool at Clear Channel we call Radar. So Radar uses mobile SDK data mapped against all of our poster and screen sites across the country, so we can see audience behavior in our screen locations in near real time. So this gives us a much greater view of how to reach our audiences. And there's 4 parts to this. So we can see audience demographics, we can see, using credit and debit card data, we can see exactly what people are buying both on and offline. Through browsing history and app usage, we can understand audience lifestyle habits. And then really interestingly, we can see exactly what retail locations and other points of interest people are visiting in the real world. So that gives us a much more interesting view of how to plan. An example to bring this to life is to say that on the left here is kind of the traditional way of planning outdoor, is that, let's say you're a new MPD and you want to target the Asda shopper, you could do that in proximity to walking distance to Asda stores in the Merseyside area, as you can see from this chart. Whereas the audience data will give you a much better view of actually how we can build frequency with the Asda shopper and actually identify where they are based on where they move around the city. Believe it or not, as loyal as the Asda shopper is, they don't spend their whole week hanging outside an Asda store. So that's why this data can become a little bit more interesting in terms of how you can find this audience in a more sophisticated way. Then we talk about this kind of idea of right place, right time, and this is a nice example of Rob's work from Arla. And this is kind of really showcasing how you can deliver the kind of right product or right message in the right time. So there's a few things happening here. It's got localized messaging served dynamically. It's also delivering the right product in the right time or day. So for example, a double espresso is more likely to resonate on a Monday morning when you need it most versus a frappuccino when you're treating yourself at the weekend. And then it's also got a layer of weather-triggered messaging in there. So when the weather hit a certain temperature, that could trigger this creative on the right, which would offer people the opportunity to scan and receive a coupon to receive a free iced coffee on a hot day in their nearest Tesco store. And this type of use of digital out-of-home is becoming kind of commonplace across so many different categories now. So a really nice example here from L'Oreal. So they're using UV index data to trigger creative across the whole of the summer months to push sales of sun cream in boot stores. This one I really like from Specsavers. They're using live appointment feed data localized to that specific location. So if you want to get your eyes tested, or you should get your eyes tested, then you can actually see how many appointments are available on that given day, and it's more likely to nudge consumers into their stores. Or someone like Budweiser, who are nudging people to pick up their buds before the big game. So they've got a countdown to the kickoff. They've got the location and the distance of the nearest retailer that's selling buds in proximity to those stores. So there's loads of examples like this, and what we're seeing is this is proven to deliver the results. So a study we did as an industry showed that using digital out-of-home contextually in the right moments with the right content sees huge uplifts in brain response, in ad recall, and most importantly, sales effects, and the overall ad effectiveness of plus 17% from using that approach. So I'm just going to finish with one example, which for me just kind of brings everything together that I talked about and kind of really shows why out-of-home or how out-of-home has evolved into this kind of flexible data-driven channel. And this is for Aspel Cider. It ran recently just across the summer. And there's a few elements going on here. They've got the off-trades and they've got the on-trade to think about. Also want to make sure that they're relevant and live in the key moments across the summer. So they use different types of data sets for their on-trade campaign. So a combination of audience data to reach their humble pleasure seeker audience. That was combined with location data to make sure they were in proximity to their on-trade distribution in the cities that the campaign ran. And then simultaneously, they had an off-trade campaign promoting the can variant, as you can see here, with a dynamic feed calling out the nearest Tesco retailer, and this was planned using location data in proximity to Tesco stores. But actually the most interesting part of this campaign is how they used the traditional way of planning out of home, which was to go live in a kind of 4 to 6 week period at the beginning of the summer, and then layered in an element of programmatic out of home, which meant that they could be active in the moments that matter. Now, unsurprisingly for a cider brand, when it's warm and sunny, that's when people think of and buy more cider. So what programmatic out of home allowed them to do is using weather-triggered data, so when it was both warm and sunny, and that was localized to specific regions, that would trigger the additional plays to display at those specific moments. That meant they had an increased share of voice during the bulk of the campaign at the beginning of the summer, but also meant they had a long tail throughout the whole 12 weeks of the summer, and meant they had a presence throughout all of those key hotspots of the campaign. And I know everyone wants to see results when we show examples, and you can see this campaign delivered a 27% increase in brand considerations, and going back to that kind of consideration point that I made at the start. So hopefully I've been able to explain why I still believe that out-of-home is the best placed channel right now to thrive in this era of retail media. And it is about that combination of both reach and retail. So that's mostly it from me. Now I'll introduce Rob properly. So this is Rob Edwards, Head of Media and Digital at Arla Foods.
Thank you very much. What an entrance. Thank you very much for the round of applause. I assume it was for you, Colin. Look, I can tell you about what we do, and probably the best starting point is to explain who Arla is. So some of you probably know our sub-brands better than the Arla master brand. We are a global dairy business, farmer-owned cooperative. So the great thing about my job is that everything we do has a positive impact back on farm. Sustainability investment, animal welfare investment, etc., etc. So what do we do? In the UK, we have 14 sub-brands: Lurpak, Anchor, Cravendale, for example. Starbucks with the ready-to-drink coffee is a license of ours, so everything to do with that is us in the UK and globally, actually. We have a deal with Yo Valley as well, so some of you will know Yo Valley. They still own their yogurt business. Everything else is delivered by us. My responsibility as Head of Media and Digital is to make sure that our brands are activated in the right channels at the right time with the right people, and more often than not, from a digital perspective, that's all delivered in-house. So we have ramped up what we do in the business to deliver to consumers from our own headquarters. We work very closely with our media agency and obviously with media partners as well to deliver more traditionalised activation, but then there's a blended approach when we start to talk about things like this, where the evolution and digitisation of traditional media, you start to see that obviously the relationship direct with a media owner starts to evolve at a greater rate. Hence, conversations we're probably going to get into now.
Do you want to tell us a bit about how you're using out-of-home at Arla and kind of why it's become such a key channel across your kind of entire portfolio of brands?
Yeah, look, I guess there's two bits to that as an answer, and one of it is around performance. Let's be brutally honest. We measure everything that we do. As I say, as a cooperative, we want to make sure there's a positive impact of every pound we spend. We get something in return positively. And it happens to be that out of home over the years that I've been involved in the business, which is 5 years now, has been year on year one of those successful channels. Hence, we've accelerated what we do with out of home and specifically Clear Channel. But we've also engaged in different formats. So when we think about the creativity of out of home with special builds through to the storytelling through in and nudge into store to the conversion piece as well. So I think for me, out of home, I've reflected on this through the day. There's been talk about a red thread and data and loyalty data. And for me, it's almost a similar thing. I think that the red thread that potentially out of home gives us is that sofa to store tracking and that ability to storytell and change that story to need state moments of consumers, and obviously not every consumer becomes a shopper, so you need that agility through that process. So we've adopted that mentality. I don't think we're there yet. I think we've got a lot of work to do, if I'm brutally honest, from a creative perspective, but the journey and the ambition is certainly there, and I think out of home is a strong provider of our results. We are a £1 billion net revenue branded business in the UK. So, you might not have heard of Arla today, but you probably go and look at the products when you leave tonight. So,
cool, thanks, Rob. So, obviously showed that example of your work on the Starbucks iced coffee before, and you're seeing good results from out of home, which is brilliant. Do you think that the kind of growth of digital, the kind of point I made about how the evolution of out of home, has that kind of helped you see better results? Have you started using it differently over the 5 years you've been in the business?
I'm smiling because I think I could answer it with exactly your presentation and the slides earlier on. I think everything you said was absolutely right. It was a moment of kind of going, okay, again, going back to the start of today, everything starts with insight. Everything starts around consumer and consumer habits. And our role is to tell a story, engage consumers to drive them to a point of conversion. So we drive branded growth and sales for us and for retailers. Mm. And I think the evolution of digital out of home and that campaign specifically is a great example of going, you know what, we need to be better. We need to tell a story at the right moment, in the right time, in the right location as well. And it's a supportive story, often than not, rather than a disruptive one. So it's brand loyalty, but it's telling a story. So I think digital out of home absolutely has basically refreshed the out-of-home industry, and I think that's continued with the adoption of retail media and loyalty data. I think if it hadn't have done something like that, arguably it could have been a little bit entrenched in how it used to be, paper, static, etc. But brands now have the opportunity to jump into need state moments, to be agile with creative, change the storytelling mechanic, and really try and engage consumers to nudge them into shoppers and therefore conversions. So yeah, absolutely.
Cool. And so how are you making it work alongside the kind of other channels in the mix?
Yeah, so good question. Really simple answer. We stack everything up. I'd love to tell you that I've got £1 billion to be always on everywhere from an omni-channel perspective. We don't. So we have to be really measured and understand consumer moments and personas and need states and everything else. So what we have to do is stack it to ensure that we have an omni-channel style activation. Mm. We're in a process now of making sure that continues from out of store to in store. But that partnership through media is something that we actively measure and actively engage in. I think what was interesting this morning when we talk about ROI, some ROI is really efficient, some is less efficient, but what's the purpose of that activation? Did it serve something else to the consumer or to a shopper that engaged in a different way? So whilst the ROI chase and the measurement and the metrics are really important and perform really well, that stacked approach and understanding the purpose of the activity through that journey to that point of conversion and brand loyalty is really important. So it works in tandem across the board.
So you kind of mentioned measurement in there, but I'm going to dig a little bit deeper on that. And obviously we had this conversation before, but for the sake of everyone else in the audience, because I know it's a key thread throughout today is to talk about measurement. Do you want to talk a bit about how you measure outdoor or maybe the kind of more wider omni-channel mix?
To the nth degree. Look, we commit to econometric modelling. We have done for decades, and I think that's really important. You don't have to be wedded to it consistently because you have to have other metrics and caveats to that measurement. But I think econometrics gives you an opportunity to really look at performance in year and understand base, incrementality, and where that point of origin has come from. If you track back to your media activation, to your shopper activation, e-com, etc. So we measure it in that sense. We measure it with atypical media performance metrics as well. And then a slight different tack that we've taken at the end of last year and this year. And the reason behind that is because I think some of our KPIs in a business have been very much around budget chase. I need more budget to do what I need to do because my KPIs tell me I need to achieve a big number. Actually, what we are now looking at is an effectiveness score, which means if, we can commit to omnichannel and not worry about, we need 10% growth in budget for a particular channel because it's the best ROI. Actually, what we're doing with one budget pot is measuring the outputs and saying, where am I best putting that money, that budget, based on the insight and the information we have from a measurement protocol, which isn't a budget feeding fest. It's about effectiveness and efficiency.
it's been talked a little bit this morning as well, is the kind of increase in in-store digital screen networks. It's obviously something we've invested in our partnership with Sainsbury's as well. How do you see this kind of working alongside kind of traditional above-the-line, out-of-home, digital out-of-home, whatever you want to call it? Is that something you do at the moment, or how do you see those two things working in tandem?
100%. Go back to the red thread. You know, this is about engaging with consumers so they're comfortable, they understand, they witness a brand, and there isn't something that's wildly different in store as opposed to outside of store. It is really important that there is a consistency through that. So I think that benefit of working in tandem is fantastic. I think the creative step on in store is really exciting. For me, when we talk about retail media, I think what the next event horizon is that creativity. You know, is it to disrupt? Is it to entertain? Is it just to help people through? And there's a wild difference between the brands that have been on stage today, because when I look at it and we go down the milk aisle, you know, the average time spent considering the purchase of milk is less time than the average time spent considering buying toilet paper. So when we're talking about trying to entertain or change the buying perception of own label versus branded milk, we have to storytell, and that starts outside of store and translates into store. And I think the in-store digitization of those assets, great opportunity. I would say, obviously, what we need to make sure of is there is consistency of measurement, consistency of assets available, and collaboration across retail.
You know, we're seeing at Clear Channel like more out of home being bought through retail media networks, shopper teams, or programmatic, etc. There's so many more different kind of buying points coming in. Do you think we're sort of seeing this blurred lines now between, you know, what we traditionally call above the line, below the line? How do you see that kind of playing out?
Yeah, to make it really difficult for you, two answers. So yes and no. It kind of was internally. So the internal piece for us was very much, you know, where does this sit? Who owns the relationship? Who do I speak to for this activation? Where's that blended, messy middle starting to kind of tread on toes? Kind of, but actually what we've done is embraced a kind of working mentality within the business, and it's still growing. But that collaborative approach to planning and understanding where those connection points are moving forward is what we've adopted, and our ambition is obviously to drive that omni-channel planning mindset. And I think the beauty of something like that is if I come from a traditional media, and I say traditional which incorporates digital, social, influence, etc. If I can take that experience and give part of that to the shopper marketing team, to the e-com team, when they start to understand how their own, certainly in-store, is evolving and what does performance look like, then that's a positive. So there's a kind of yes-no element of that. I think externally, yes, to be brutally honest, because there is a multitude of connections that I could make and spend money with that would arguably give me the same data. So I think we've seen it today when you talk about, with retail media networks, you talk about the clean rooms, you talk about ad tech and what have you. So we have dialogue with all retailers. We have dialogue, from a media perspective with the retail media networks further up that funnel, if you like. And I think, we work really closely with the IAB and ISBA, and I think both trade bodies have really worked hard to bring both retailers together and ad tech together and measurement together, because I think there needs to be a consistency of approach and a realization that actually for a brand like us, we are retailer agnostic. So much as I'd love to spend, 100 million quid with Sainsbury's or Morrison's or Asda, we wouldn't do that. We have to be agnostic. Yes, there is a pot of money associated to that, but it has to be effective. And when we get to a point in the planning cycle and go, actually, we are seeing better outputs and returns by investing more here, then we'll over-invest in those elements. So I think that messy middle piece and how it works, the ask, and I've seen it in the trade body groups, is clarity of measurement, collaboration, consistency of creative assets and opportunities to a certain degree. There will be some nuances, obviously, and then an opportunity, because I really like the discussion early on where you talk about retailers either being a retailer or a publisher. I said that 18 months ago to our leadership team and said it feels like at the moment that retailers are acting like retailers, not as publishers. And I'm old enough to have been in, print media a long, long time ago when we kind of had to change our mentality around a website as opposed to print option. And I think retailers are in a similar element of, do we need to change the way we look at brands as not just suppliers but as clients? Or I think the great term that was used earlier on was guests. I really like that, because a guest can turn up and give you something, or a guest can turn up and expect everything in return. And that's almost supplier-client relationship. So it's an interesting dynamic for me, but the yes and no is my attempt at a political answer.
Right, I think we've got time for probably one final question. So a bit of a broad one, but where do you see the future of out-of-home?
I've got 4 elements to an answer. First one, theme of the day, measurement. So it's that data, that insight. What's the measurement that is the starting point to everything else that kicks out? And you've evidenced a lot of that already, which was great to see. I think it is then performance. We will always look at performance, and we will always look to invest in high-performing channels. So theory, you get the data right, you get the insight right, you connect with consumers, then performance is going to be there. So I think, data, performance, and then creative. Absolutely. Look, I'm old. I love out of home, and I've seen out of home, through the years. And I think when you get it right, it's brilliant. From a special build perspective to a storytelling perspective, all the way into store. And then the final one, if you want to think about the future of out of home, just a bit of a funny one for me is Blade Runner. Blade Runner, if you look at the open sequences of Blade Runner, the original film, not the new one, you look at it and go, that's where I fell in love with out of home. Amazing. The technology, the way it's brought to life, fantastic. So if you don't do anything tonight and just go and watch a film, go and watch that one.
I wonder where you were going to go with that then, Rob.
I know.
I thought you were going to bring it back to Stoke City. God.
There's still time.
Yeah, we've got 15 seconds. So anyway, I should say massive thank you to Rob. Thank you for having me as well on the stage. And hopefully you've kind of all taken something away from this session. And I think, I guess the point that we wanted to make here is out of home continues to be the oldest medium, but also the one with the brightest future. Thank you very much.
Thank you.